talk a bit better.
No.
But just so you know, I'm
Just
jealous.
for the introduction, just to say where I am. No, I don't need that paper, sorry. It was just for white balance. Thank you for picking it up for me.
Well, I've trusted it
Probably
with me.
fell out my pocket.
What do you mean? Do you really?
Meteorological Association.
Hey, Ethel. Yeah, man. I see you, girl. I see you right there.
See? This is a very good security feature in South Africa, ne?
Okay.
People don't think, if the screens are shut, they're like, oh, okay, no one's watching, there's no one's in the room. Meanwhile, I see ya.
Let me see if our guys have found
The head of the World Meteorological Organization, Michael Javot, has the same problem, saying that past climate trends just are not. Good morning and welcome to the Albert Lutuli International Convention Centre here in Durban. This is day 5 of deliberations in the climate change talks that are taking place here. 194 members that aggregate under the name Conference of Parties, Session 17, hence the name COP17, are here and they're discussing climate change and what they can do about it. We've been hearing a constant theme throughout that there are some developed nations that are dragging their feet along the way, and other countries, developed nations, expecting more. On the sidelines, you've got your civil society groups and other people, interested parties, not happy with the pace of change. Today, on day 5, there's going to be closed session hearings or discussions, which means that they're not open to the general public, and only parties and observers will have access to those. And they'll be discussing amongst other things, Green Climate Fund and a Clean Development Mechanism as well. A little bit later on, we're going to be hearing from some of those those countries that are under fire at the moment. The USA, for example, South Africa, Brazil and Japan, and also the European Commission. They'll be holding a press conference, and we'll listen on that and find out how they're defending some of the positions that they've taken and responding to some of the criticisms that's been leveled against them. I've got to tell you, today's a little bit cooler than of the last few days. It's been a bit mad weather-wise. Unpredictable as best. You know that old adage, as unpredictable as the weather? Well, certainly felt it here. On Sunday, we had torrential rains that you can't believe. And in fact, I was driving in the city centre and the water came up to the car door level. Last night it rained again a little bit more. And if you think that we can't figure it out, guess what? Guess who else is having trouble dealing with the weather? The man at the top of the tree, the head of the World Meteorological Association, says that they are struggling now to use statistics from the past to forecast weather in the future. Things have changed so much that basically they have to make it up as they go along now. The past is no longer an indicator of the future. Farmers who used to say, could predict reasonably that at a certain time of the year it's going to rain, they're just saying that the weather has changed. So there you have it. We're seeing it in the flesh, as it were, here at the Durban International Convention Centre. The weather certainly has changed, and it's got a new angle here at the climate change talks. Right, to help us unpack the issues of the day, we have a team of my colleagues that are around the ICC and further afield, and we've got a number of guests that between us will be chatting to and unpacking, as I said, some of those issues. Let's meet our team now, beginning with Blaine Herman. Good morning, Blaine.
Morning, Peter. Yes, live from the University of KwaZulu-Natal People's Space, as it's been dubbed. Today we're talking air quality, and for that we head down south, the South Durban Basin in particular. It's very interesting, that situation there. Residents living among industries. It's complex issues that's coming from there. We're hoping to speak to environmentalists who's working on the ground, exploring some of those issues. Also, there's about 1,000 women from rural areas across Africa. They want their voices heard here at COP17. They have very strong messages to world government. We'll explore some of those issues, all coming up in the next few minutes or so. But first, let's check out what else is coming up in the program. Let's cross over now to Nomawethu Soldonde.
Thank you, Blaine. Well, we are coming to you live from the Beehive, which is at the Durban Botanic Gardens. And as you can see behind me, a very interesting structure. It's in a tradition form. And really what it aims to achieve is to encourage people to build more healthy ecosystems. And it's also the first of its kind in Africa. But we'll bring you more detail on how it works a little bit later. For now, let's check what Asanda has in store for us.
Well, I have found a new, maybe not totally new, but I found a good way for big companies, corporate, to do business but still curb their carbon emissions. It's called telepresence, but you know what? I'm not going to tell you all about it now. We have somebody we'll talk to a bit later. So let's go to Peter and see what he's got.
Sandra, thank you very much indeed. So that's the team. A busy morning ahead of us, a lot of issues to get through, and between us I think we'll hopefully bring some light to some of the key issues that keep cropping up, and also inform you a little bit more about some of the peripheral issues that perhaps we don't talk about often. Now, just before I talk to my next guest, our Energy Minister, Dipuo Peters, has been facing a barrage of questions for the past weeks, in fact, leading up to this climate change conference, about the route that we're taking as a country, South Africa, in meeting our energy needs. The fact that South Africa has chosen to go the route of coal when a lot of other countries are starting to shy away from that. And well, let's listen to what she had to say in defending the policy that South Africa has taken.
I just want to indicate that we did have the first preliminary meeting with the Greenpeace Africa office, and we're still going to have another meeting with them to engage on the statistics that they have or the information that they have in that particular report, because there seems to be a misunderstanding or misalignment of information that we have and that they have. But I just want to indicate that as we speak, we do have coal-fired power stations running. That already is factored into the cost. So if you talk about the new technology, obviously any new technology that is still being imported to South Africa as we speak will cost us a lot of money. And we are saying that is why one of the requirements that we have put into the Copenhagen Accord through President Zuma was related to technological as well as capacity and financial support, because we know that the renewable energy technologies that we're talking about does not come cheap.
So that was the Energy Minister, Dipuo Peters. It looks like coal's definitely not off the horizon in terms of South Africa's energy questions going forward. It remains the base load format that we're using at the moment, and the renewable energies will be phased in, and hopefully the mix, I think she was saying, is going to shift over time, and so that there'll be less dependence on coal as time progresses. All right, well, let's change tack a little bit, but let's still focus on energy. We're now joined by the Director of the National Cleaner Production Centre of South Africa, the NCPCSA, Ndivhuo Rapulu. And now the NCPSA is the DTI's Industrial Sustainability Program, hosted at the CSIR. Welcome to the program. Thank you.
Thank you and welcome.
All right, okay, tell us a little bit about your centre and what it is that you're doing within the DTI to deal with some of these issues that we're discussing here.
The centre is an institution owned by the Department of Trade and Industry, and the mandate is to foster the application or the use of resource efficiency and cleaner production methodologies and techniques to improve the efficiency and competitiveness of South African industry. And the whole idea is based on what can we do to protect our resources but still create jobs, stimulate economic growth, and also protect our environment. So the centre aims within the IPEP, the Industrial Policy Action Plan 2, to be the bridge between our environmental commitments and our social commitments and the industrial development commitments.
Is it possible? I mean, they seem to be on opposite ends of the scale. You know, you either please one and hate the other, or please the other and hate the other. Is either coal dirty or renewable, or is it as simple as that?
It's a serious balancing act. It's not possible, and specifically for Africa, where sometimes the economics in terms of is it feasible at current economic trends, is it feasible in terms of technological application processes, it becomes a serious balancing act, and you're looking at Africa sits with a huge poverty issue, so you need to balance the social needs, the economic needs, and also environmental needs. And I think that is why things like COP gives a platform for us to explore alternative ways of doing it.
Right, you talk about alternative ways of doing it. What are the real tangible options that South Africa has in terms of renewable energy?
Well, there are low-hanging fruits, the ones that you don't necessarily have to invest much. You look at waste-to-energy issues, you look at solar issues. To me, those will be very simple. But there are those who are low-hanging fruit, but technically not really feasible, like water, hydro issues. We are a dry country. We don't have much rivers or water that could support such heavy hydro systems. But it is a good plan to go for. But there are also issues of nuclear, which are very technologically advanced, needed, But
that's not very clean, though, is it, nuclear?
Not necessarily. But you're looking at issues of skills, and you're looking at also balancing. You see, with Africa, the one big challenge is how do you balance the environmental protection against employment creation and against civilization that still needs to happen in the continent.
We're running out of time, but very briefly, all these alternative energies are great, but how can we fund them? It doesn't look like we're going to get much help from the West and the developed nations. They're about to go into full-on recession.
The challenge is with current economic trends, I do not think most developing countries would be able to afford some of these activities. And probably we need a new model of funding where both government and private sector would come on board and cross-subsidize each other. And that might be the best way of doing it.
Ndivhuo Rapulu, thank you very much for joining us on the program.
Thank you.
All right. right. Okay, so there you have it. A very tricky balancing act that's required between the dirty energy and the new, cleaner, renewable energies that people are pushing for. And in the middle of that, of course, is that whole equation of, well, we need to create jobs. And a lot of this needs support from the developed nations and countries abroad. And the European Union is here. They've kind of been straddling in between countries such as the US, Japan and Russia. And yesterday my colleague Blaine Herman caught up with a delegate from the European Union and had a short conversation with him. Let's listen in.
The EU's Arthur Runge-Metzger, thank you very much indeed for joining us on SABC. Well, at the outset, the EU has said that they are fully behind a legally binding deal to be found here in Durban. Observers inside say you're battling to find traction. Is that the case?
We think that our proposal is finding a lot of traction, particularly in many parts of developing countries. Just take the small island states. They will be suffering most from climate change, so they have a great interest in a legally binding deal. So have the least developed countries. So I think we are pushing into the same direction.
But what are some of the conditions that the EU has set out in order to get a second commitment period from the Kyoto Protocol?
I think there's two things we are talking about. One is that we want to see an improved Kyoto Protocol to improve the environmental effectiveness of it. And the second thing is that we get to know what all the others who are outside the Kyoto Protocol are going to do in future and when they are going to commit.
You said you were ready in Copenhagen, you're ready in Cancun, now in Durban. What do you think are the forces blocking?
I think there's some kind of anxiety in many countries who do not know, okay, what does it exactly mean for us? What does it mean for our policies? What does it mean for our development prospects? And I think this is something we need to take serious in the negotiations, and we need to address that in one way or the other. It's not about compromising development, it's making development possible for the future.
If action is not taken now, what are you afraid of?
That temperatures will go way beyond 2 degrees. 2 degrees, the scientists say, that is the threshold when everything gets very, very dangerous. So we need to stay below. But if we can't meet that, then we might go to 3.5 or 4 or 5 degrees. What prospect does it leave for future generations?
Well, is 2 degrees enough? Do you think deeper cuts are needed, though?
I think this is a discussion that is happening at the moment among scientists, and we have planned a review for the period 2013-15 to look at particular this question, whether we even have to go deeper.
Let's just talk about funding. The EU has committed itself to about 7.2 billion euros. I understand the period is between 2010 and 2012 in order for, well, developing countries to mitigate and adapt to the forces of climate change. What has been outlaid so far?
So far, we are at the end of the second year. We have committed 2/3 of that money. So we are well on track in staying and delivering on our promise.
Currently, there's a difficult situation in the European zone financially. Do you think you can still commit to the money that you promised?
Yes, we can, because Europeans take the fight against climate change serious, and we know that we have to cooperate with developing countries in order to win this battle.
What are you willing to settle for in Durban?
We are willing to settle for a continuation of the second commitment period if there is a clear roadmap, a mandate on how to take negotiations forward to bring in all the countries into a new legal treaty.
Do you see any progress being made in the near future in terms of actual talks now, in terms of other countries trying to come to the party? Certain economies need to play their role. How holistic does these talks need to be?
We think that if you want to be effective in terms of limiting the growth or reducing emissions, then you will have to have all the major economies on board, because only then you're going to cover the majority of the emissions in this world.
The EU's Arthur Runge-Metzger, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
That was Arthur Runga Metzger from the European Union speaking to my colleague Blaine Herman yesterday around the issue of financial aid and also what the hopes the European Union have in terms of these climate change talks taking place at the moment. We're going to take a quick break, but after that we're going to a very interesting location in the Botanical Gardens, and Namawetu will be taking us through what she's seeing there.
Stand by, Frank. Don't. Welcome back to the Beehive, which is at the Durban Botanic Gardens, and the organizers and the people involved in constructing this beautiful structure behind me say this is a way of bringing biodiversity, people, and other stuff together so that we can have ways to deal with climate change. But to tell us more about what the structure is all about and how it's going to work, we are joined by Crystal Mays from Sanby. Good morning, Crystal, and thank you so much for joining us. I speak about how this structure brings people, biodiversity and engineering together. How is this supposed to work?
Good morning. Engineering on its own is unlikely to help society cope with the challenges of climate change going forward. And so what we're exhibiting here through this massive art installation is a combination of traditions, Zulu traditional beehive hut formation. The structure here made out of steel is based entirely on the traditional methods, together with high-density steel and high-tech engineering, and then that is overlaid with a natural ecosystem made up of indigenous plants from the KwaZulu-Natal province. And what we're saying is we need to bring together and harness the innovation potential of people, engineering and biodiversity to help society cope with climate change. And that's what this beehive is inspiring us to do. It's an utterly unique feature. There's nothing like this in the world. You do get living walls elsewhere in the world, but in the shape of a traditional dwelling, absolutely not, and not on this scale. So this really is unique.
And how we talk about the structure, that it has a living roof and living walls. Talk us about the plants and when it comes to dealing with climate change.
Okay, in terms of the plants are our biodiversity in this country, the amazing variety of life that South Africa is blessed with. We are the third richest country in the world in terms of biodiversity, and that gives us a competitive advantage in terms of dealing with climate change. Unbeknown to most, when you open your tap at home and you get clean running water, where does that come from? It comes from healthy, clean mountain catchments that are well restored, well looked after. Thriving biodiversity underpins the provision of clean, healthy water. And we're one of the few countries in the world where you drink the water out the taps.
Talk us about through the shape of the dome as well. You linked through tradition as well. How are you bringing tradition in this whole structure?
We're not only bringing it in through the architecture, but we're also bringing it in through the plants that you see around here. Many of the plants are traditional medicines that are used today, and some of the plants are also used in building materials. So we've tried to bring in traditional Zulu culture throughout this installation.
Thank you very much for your time. Well, that was Crystal Mays. She is from Sanby, telling us how biodiversity, people and engineering are being brought together in order for us to deal better with climate change. That's all we have down here at the Beehive. We will be back a little bit later. We will tell you how the Beehive actually links into the Botanic Garden and how they aim to actually work. Well, goodbye. Back to you, Peter.
No, Mawetu, thank you very much indeed. Very nice location that you're situated at. I mean, we've got a bit of greenery here, but it's not quite the same thing. We're right in the heart of the ICC where closed-door sessions are taking place today. Conference of Parties, 194 parties coming together for the 17th session. And today, discussing some important issues, Green Climate Fund amongst that. And one of the organizations or groupings that are going to be part of this closed-door sessions is the African delegation. The African countries that are here have got, their needs, and they need help, and they've got requirements that they need to sift through. And to help us discuss Africa's position and hopes, I'm now joined by Tasneem Essop, who's the head of delegation for WWF at these talks here. Tasneem, thank you very much for joining us and welcome back.
Thank you, Peter.
All right, we spoke to you at the beginning of the week, at the opening session of these climate talks, and we talked about a number of things, and one of them was, there wasn't too much hope for a legally binding agreement by the end of these talks. It's been quite a dramatic week. Are you less optimistic?
Well, we certainly didn't come into this conference expecting the big bang legally binding agreement, but we certainly did have expectations for some outcomes. And the key issue here, of course, is the future of the Kyoto Protocol. And we wanted agreements around that, and also an agreement amongst all parties that they will look at negotiating a new climate regime that includes everybody in the future. There's not been any real clear direction or a point at which we could say parties are reaching agreement at this point in time yet. So that's all up in the air, and we're certainly not seeing any good signs around that. We're hoping that when the politicians come in next week that there'll be some momentum behind those discussions, because that is really a political issue that needs to be resolved. And then on the issue of finance, we came in with the expectation that we would see two things: the Green Climate Fund set up and operationalized, but also that sources of funding would be identified clearly, telling us where we will get the money and where it will be able to flow from into this fund. You can't have the fund without the money. And even the Green Climate Fund is now under discussion, and the report from the Transitional Committee potentially being reopened for renegotiation. We'll have to watch that go down. So things have been slow, and there have been some interesting turns, and we're getting worried. It's the end of the first week, and again, as I said, we're hoping when the heads of state come in next week, when the politicians come in next week, they need to know the world is watching.
All right, well, let's talk about the politicians. When we first met, you outlined Africa's position. Remind us, as a bloc, what have they agreed and what are they hoping to get out of these talks?
Well, just the big things that Africa would expect is, of course, they've made it clear they want a second commitment period for the Kyoto Protocol. That was a basic demand from the Africa group. The second thing, of course, is the issue of finance. And for Africa, that's particularly important. Africa is going to be the most vulnerable. In terms of the science, it's clear, and there are going to be huge impacts. It's going to impact on economies, on people, on the environment, on security of livelihoods. You need funding to deal with the impacts, but also to help Africa in its economic development, to help that economic development steer in another path. Finance is a big issue. And the third issue is they wanted an equal treatment of adaptation and mitigation. Often adaptation is a last priority on the agenda and doesn't move along quite as urgently, and they would like to see that settled as well.
All right, Tasneem, we're going to talk again, I have no doubt about that, certainly next week when the politicians and heads of state arrive. But for now, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. Nice to see you again, Peter.
That was Tasneem Essop from the WWF. She's the head of delegation at these particular talks, outlining Africa's position at these talks for us. Okay, let's go to, again, one of my colleagues, Asanda Mbeche. She's at the exhibition center. Asanda?
Well, Peter, remember I told you earlier that I'd found a cheaper way for business to conduct its own business. Well, there's been a lot of talk about making the world and how it functions greener, to do business in a greener way. And I found a tent right here for what is called telepresence. It's a way of conducting business by lowering greenhouse gas emissions at the same time. How you put these two things together is that inside this tent there's a boardroom of sorts with some real and virtual boardroom space put together. It's called telepresence. Well, I'm no technology guru, but somebody who knows a bit more about it is Sheikh Kaleem from Cisco, a company that deals with technology. Tell us how this telepresence idea works.
So telepresence has the power to transform, and telepresence is a technology which works over the internet and over leased lines. We have endpoints which are high definition video endpoints which are in this tent as well as spread across globally in the world. And so in this conference where we have delegates around the world are attending, we have only 20,000 here, but the world has over 5 billion people, and the telepresence technology helps people collaborate with this conference across the internet and over networks.
Well, look, generally we understand that teleconferencing is an idea that's been there for a while but hasn't been maximized. But another issue that comes, the greenhouse gas emissions issue we were talking about earlier, to see how business can curb it. How does it affect traveling costs, this telepresence idea?
Yes. So as I mentioned earlier, telepresence, this technology has the immersive experience. It's like you and me talking in front of each other, except you could be in South Africa and I could be in United States, and we can have a very meaningful conversation with a great experience, right? So with this, I can avoid travel if I need to. Not completely eliminate, but I can reduce travels. For example, at Cisco Systems, we have saved over $1 billion in travel for the last 4 years and reduced over 640,000 tons of carbon emissions by using this technology.
Well, it sounds like a great idea. Any idea more or less whether the connectivity is easier to put together between continents?
Absolutely. We can leverage multiple ways to connect. Today, we are expanding the reach of telepresence not alone in the boardroom, but to everyone. You can come across an internet line on a laptop or a small endpoint, or you can be in a boardroom, and using various technologies, we can connect people, and we put people in the center of collaboration.
Thank you so much. That's Sheikh Kaleem from Cisco, a company that says instead of traveling, polluting the earth, try telepresence, meet in a virtual boardroom and make it work for you. Let's go to an ad break and we'll get more after that.
There's water. No matter to come. I can't hear them. Lift them. Come. Yes. I can hear her. Come. Good morning and welcome back to the Beehive, a very interesting structure just behind us, really the first of its kind in Africa. And there's a reason why it's actually situated here at the Durban Botanical Gardens. And to tell us more about this link between the structure and the gardens, we are joined by our guest from the Botanical Garden, who's the curator. Please tell us more. What is the link between this structure and the rest of the Botanical Gardens?
This is a uniquely designed African solution
representing biodiversity, people and engineering. It's located here at our very beautiful Durban Botanic Gardens. It's the oldest surviving botanic garden on the African continent and offers a very unique design and look at gardens of the future.
And how does the Beehive form part of the Garden Window project?
The Garden Window project really is our view of the future around ideas of biodiversity, education, research, heritage and horticultural excellence, and the Living Beehive represents all 5 of those key aspirations. So the whole aim of Garden Window is to help create Durban as the most living and careable city in Africa through its really beautiful Durban Botanic Gardens.
As we said, this structure actually links up with the rest of the garden. If we come back here in 20 years, what will it look like? What can we expect to see?
Well, a really fully grown, beautiful structure, a beautiful garden, the first of its kind, a garden on a domed surface, showcasing biodiversity, indigenous and endemic plants, with lots of inspiration. After 20 years, the amount of research and learning that's going to come out of this project, as the first of its kind, completely unique. So really offering solutions around environmental resilience and adaptation for Durban as a truly African city.
Take us through linking people, biodiversity and engineering together in this garden.
Okay, well, first of all, we know that without plants there is no life on our planet, and you can imagine that without plants in our cities, life is not really possible or very livable. And certainly Botanic Gardens, and particularly this project, really showcases the important link between cultural diversity, biodiversity, the very intimate link between people and plants and why they are so special and important. And when you bring in creative engineering which tries to mimic nature and also to be inspired by indigenous design, so the original way that Zulu huts were designed, that has been recreated in a very innovative engineering structure. So just the steelwork alone, the engineering, there's wonderful inspiration in that, linked to the cultural diversity of our country, linked to the plants which have so many important meanings and values for so many different people. And that really is celebrated. It's an inspiring story, the whole project, and it's just the beginning. So for the next 20 years, we can, I think, expect to see wonderful solutions coming out of this project, especially after COP17.
Thank you very much for your time. Well, that was Martin Clements. He is the curator of the Botanical Gardens, telling us more how the actual structure behind us links with the rest of the garden. Well, that's all we have down here at the Beehive. And with that, it's back to you, Peter, in the studio.
Thank you very much indeed. And I've got to say, again, picturesque, and the Botanical Gardens there, I suppose that's kind of how the world should and could look like if we take this climate change story and pollution story seriously. And talking about pollution, sadly, that's not always the story. We have organizations and companies who have their own carbon footprints. That's one issue. But another issue is when that carbon footprint and those emissions start hurting and damaging the health of people around them. And this is the case for communities in South Durban living near the Engen refinery. Studies have shown that people have had health problems as a result of the emissions that have been coming out of that plant there. And pressure groups have now started to come to bear after several incidents were reported at the plant that have certainly put the lives of residents at risk. My colleague Blaine Herman is at the University of KwaZulu-Natal, and he's been getting to the bottom of this particular problem, the issue of industry pollution. Blaine?
Indeed, Peter, live from the University of KwaZulu-Natal. Let's talk air quality now. In particular, as you mentioned, Peter, the residents in the South Durban area have a very interesting standpoint. They live among these industries. They've been for years complaining about the quality of air there. Let's explore some of these issues with Lushendri Naidu. She's from the South Durban Community Environmental Alliance. Lushendri, thank you very much indeed for joining us on this special broadcast. What is the current situation in the South Durban Basin?
Well, in the South Durban area, you find residents living amongst oil-polluting industries, and this has a negative impact on their health. And health impacts, especially would with dealing with asthma and cancer, and the rates in that area is fairly high as compared to communities that live either north of the city of Durban.
Let's just pick up on the asthma part. I understand there was a study done, well, it was done about 10 years ago with regards to a specific school where it found about over 50% of the learners at that school had asthma. Has any updates been done thus far?
Well, actually, to my knowledge, I don't think so, because we still have residents and communities complaining on a daily basis of the noxious and chemical smells that they get in the air continuously. And this is what leads to residents developing chronic symptoms such as asthma. So as far as a study is concerned, we've noted that 52% of the kids have had asthma in the one particular school. But what has been done after that? There is no proven results that the levels of pollution have decreased. There is no proven results that the communities have now experiencing better health. Nothing of that sort has been happening. We haven't seen any proof, nor have we seen any study being done thereafter since the health study.
We have spoken to some of the doctors in the area, and they have said that there's less cases now at the moment. Certain SO2 reductions have been coming down, but you say there's no real change on the ground. Residents are still complaining?
Absolutely. There must have been one isolated case that there were less residents complaining. But as far as our alliance is concerned, there are an increase actually in the number of people that have been complaining. Besides living in a very close proximity to industries, you find the entire South Durban area is just a toxic soup. And it's one of the worst toxic soups perhaps in the whole of the continent of Africa. So that shows you that the amount of pollution out there and the residents that are being affected is enormous. And I don't know if there are studies done to show the decrease in pollution and then hence a decrease in the rates of asthma.
Yeah, let's just talk about that topographical location. It doesn't help matters, doesn't it?
No, not at all. What happens is that this area is cordoned off as one of a toxic belt. So all the pollution that results from all of these refineries and paper mills in the area acts as a sink. So it doesn't go anywhere else. It is located along the coast. So it directly impacts on the communities that live within that area.
Let's just talk COP17. And now, do you find working on the ground with such residents that they have a heightened sense of issues such as climate change living in these areas?
Well, thanks to our organization, we've made very sure that they do have this heightened sense of climate change issues. And we've been on a mobilization campaign for the last 6 months, perhaps, trying to get communities aware and involved in climate change issues, not just South Durban, but further south of Durban and further north of Durban as well. And we will bring them all together tomorrow for the Global Day of Action.
Let's talk about Global Day of Action. You're hoping to take that message to the streets. What's going to happen tomorrow?
Absolutely. It will be starting at 10 a.m. at the corner of Pixley Kaseme and Warwick Avenue, and we hope at Bertha's Garden, of course, and we hope that residents and communities and people that are just generally affected by climate change and the way they're being affected, even if they don't have direct impacts of climate change, but just being involved in the environment, of taking a notice of your environment that you're living. This is what we want people to understand and be aware of, so that they would stand up for what they believe is harming their own health.
What do residents want south of Durban? It's a very complex situation. There's this tussle between industry as well as the residents. I'm sure residents don't expect industry to pick up and leave anytime soon. It's an unlikely scenario, but what is the possible solutions on the ground for the immediate future?
Well, there are a few scenarios. I think on the foremost, or one of the most important scenarios, would be to reduce your pollution levels. To look at your carbon emissions and try to reduce that in terms of climate change. It just speaks far and wide to the issues that have been experiencing, but there is something that industries in that area can do something about, and this is what we hope that they would achieve, and not just for the environment, but for people's health as well.
Lushendri Naidu, thank you very much indeed for your time. That was Lushendri Naidu from the South Durban Community Environmental Alliance. So lots more to come from here, the University of KwaZulu-Natal. Let's take a bit of a break. We'll be back after this. Back live from the University of KwaZulu-Natal. Well over 1,000 women from rural areas across Africa want to make their voices heard here at COP17. They have a strong message to world governments it has to deal with matters of women and land. And according to them, that really matters ahead of COP17. Now we have Fatima Shaboden from Women on Farms joining me now. She feels that climate change and livelihoods of women is a threat. Fatima, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Why is that so?
Well, we believe that climate change will affect every single person on the globe, but for rural people and women in particular whose livelihoods are very directly dependent on the cycles of nature, climate change is having a devastating impact, resulting in increased poverty and hunger in rural areas.
Just tell us some of the stories on the ground. What are these women experiencing?
Well, the categories of women we have at our assembly are farm workers and small farmers, women who farm independently. The farmers are telling us that because of lack of rain failure, they're experiencing significant crop failure, so ability to just produce from the land and to feed families is most affected. For farm workers, the same applies, obviously. If commercial farmers can't produce based on the cycles of nature that they've historically been dependent on, then their livelihoods are at risk as well.
Is the issue of sustainable agriculture being explored?
Well, in our assembly, it certainly is a key issue. We see this as the long-term solution in response to climate change. At the moment in South Africa, we are largely engaged in unsustainable agricultural practice, a commercial agricultural methodology that relies extensively on chemicals and pesticides and monocrops and huge quantities of water. There are alternative ways of cycling that's not in competition with the earth, but that works with the cycles of nature, and this is the agricultural methodology that we are promoting.
Fatima, the issue of climate change is often a complex issue. There's lots of science involved often. Do you find that enough information is being filtered down to the women on the ground in order for them to better understand this concept?
Yeah, well, I think NGOs are doing a big job in translating the scientific information, but actually if you work in nature as firsthand as rural women do, you don't need all the scientific jargon because women experience climate change firsthand. They can explain to you in very basic terms what it means to be cooking the earth, and that's the terminology that rural women are using. They feel that our earth is burning, that Africa in particular is being cooked by all of these emissions and pollutants, especially coming from the north.
Fatima Shaboden from Women on Farms, thank you very much indeed for your time. Well, that's it from the University of KwaZulu-Natal. Let's check in with the Sunday now.
Well, Blaine, it seems like at this particular conference, young people are determined not to be left out of the action and the discussions that are going on here. If you remember yesterday, we found young people from across the country talking about how climate change affects them. This morning, I found young people from Australia, from the Australian Youth Coalition, who are at this summit. What are you doing here?
So we just finished recently the Conference of Youth, which was a youth training camp where we trained 600 youth who can then go back to their countries and spread what they've learned and create really strong domestic movements.
Have you learned anything, though, outside of the training you're doing? Have you learned any this information from this conference?
Definitely. I've learned that international negotiations are quite difficult to influence, but I've also learned not to give up the fight and to sort of let that empower me and drive further action. So, yeah.
That's a realistic young person who says these talks are clearly not going to be easy. What are you doing now that you're here and you've experienced a bit of the training you're going to do? What's next?
Well, I guess we're still trying to build the international youth climate movement. At the moment, we're focusing on different policies as well, though. We're just about to go to an action, which is proposing that there be a fuel levy on international shipping, which will hopefully finance the Green Climate Fund. And to put that in context, international shipping produces about twice the emissions of, say, Australia. So it is a lot of emissions that it produces.
Do you know who else is involved in the action you're going to be part of now?
It's a lot of international youth, so a lot of international youth NGOs are involved. And just recently, we had a South African Youth Climate Coalition start up as a result of the Conference of Youth.
Well, I hope you do enjoy, and I wish you success with the event you're going to. That's young people of the world making their mark right here at COP17. Peter, how are you doing over there?
Well, we are actually doing pretty well. The weather is holding out over here. I've been watching with a sort of cursory glance up to the skies every once in a while. But I've seen a lot of people walk up and down, and I thought, you know what, I'm just going to stop some of them and find out why they're here and what they're up to. And I found these two young people, one from the UK and another one from Cape Town. All right, let's start with you. You're from England, and you're both with the Girl Guides Association, right?
Yep.
Let's start with you. Who are you?
I'm Leah, I'm from the UK, and we're here as the WAGS delegation, which is the World Association of Girl Guides and Girl Scouts. And we're here just to experience the conference and feedback to our members about what it's like, what's going on with climate change. We do a lot of work in our organisation related to the environment and getting our girls active and like being more environmentally friendly. So we're here just to spread our message and have some fun as well.
I can see that. What about Cape Town? Are young people getting with the program, as it were? Are they aware of what's happening to our planet?
Yes, they are, and especially with the Girl Guides and Girl Scouts, we have a curriculum, so we have a badge, and we teach the girls how to care for the environment and what the dangers are of climate change. So it's really.
What sort of things are you being taught in Girl Guides then?
We taught that, well, one of the things that I did with my unit was that I went to the shopping center and I showed them like all of the foods that come from overseas and which we could probably grow at home. So I'm teaching them that it uses a lot of emissions to bring from overseas to Cape Town when we could make it ourselves. So.
All right. And what things are you doing at home in the UK to deal with climate change as youth?
As youth, we do a lot of projects just trying to be more friendly, so making more recycled opportunities in like schools and things like that. And also, it's not exactly environmentally friendly, but or relative, but we also run a fair trade project in my town as well, which is quite cool.
All right. We're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed. All right, well, that's it from us, actually. We've had a great time here. Thank you very much for joining us, and let's do it again tomorrow, 10 to 10. On Monday, actually.